Executor or Executrix, person named in will to administer the will. The executor or executrix is the person named in a will to administer the will. If no person is named in the will, and the court appoints him or her, he or she is called an administrator or an administratrix. The executor is used for a male, and the executrix is used for a female. Related words: administrator, administratrix. Escrow holder, neutral third-party facilitator of real estate transactions. Escrow is a short-lived trust agreement. Escrow is a short period of time, often 30 to 45 days, when an unbiased third party administers the details of a real estate transaction. The escrow officer, also called escrow agent or escrow holder, follows the escrow instructions which are part of the purchase offer/purchase agreement. Some states do not use escrow, but prefer a face-to-face closing where all parties sit at the table and finalize the transaction. Escrow, on the other hand, allows seller and buyer to work separately with the escrow agent. The escrow agent can make no changes to the escrow instructions unless mutually agreed to in writing by both seller and buyer. The reason escrow helps is that an unbiased third party is helpful to justify and accurately facilitate the details of today's complicated real estate transactions. The escrow holder is also called the escrow agent. Synonyms: escrow agent, escrow officer. Intestate, person dying without a will. This word is used as in, quote, he or she died intestate, end quote. It means he or she has died without a will. The implications are that now there has to be a probate process where the court takes over to administer the assets of the deceased. The word intestate means dying without a will. Dual agency, acting as agent for both seller and buyer. Dual agency is acting as agent for both the seller and the buyer. Agents may like acting as a dual agent because they keep the full commission, often 6% of the sale price, The conflict of interest is based on the different goals of the seller and buyer. The seller wants as high a price as possible. The buyer wants as low a price as possible. A dual agent may become more focused on closing the deal than on representing these two conflicting interests. Dual agency is more likely okay with more sophisticated buyers and sellers who are using the dual agent more to facilitate the transaction than to fight for their needs. Dual agency is acting as agent for both seller and buyer. Downzoning, going from a zoning density to a lower zoning density. Downzoning is going from a zoning density to a lower density. Density is the amount of use a particular type of zoning receives. A commercial zoning that changes to a residential zoning is downzoning. A R3 multi-unit residential zoning that moves to an R1, a single-unit residential zoning, is downzoning. Action in ejection. Court order to remove a tenant by force. Legal eviction of a tenant who will not abide by the lease, typically that means not pay the rent, must follow a precise process starting with the 3-day notice to pay or quit. The next step is going to court by filing an unlawful detainer action. If the judge rules in favor of the landlord, then the landlord can have the sheriffs forcefully remove the non-paying tenant. The court case is called an unlawful detainer action or an action in ejectment. If the judge rules in favor of the landlord, then both are the removal of an non-paying tenant by physical force. Synonyms: unlawful detainer action. Declaration of restrictions. Form giving subdivision owners the right to enforce CC&Rs. Most condominium complexes (common interest developments or CIDs) and subdivisions have a homeowners association (HOA) which abides by a written agreement called CC&Rs. These are the covenants (promises), conditions (promises and consequences), and restrictions of living within the community or subdivision. The CC&Rs are developed by the association and enforced by the association. Breaching the CCRs can result in disciplinary action like fines, and can even result in the exclusion from the community or subdivision. The Declaration of Restrictions is the document within a subdivision which contains the CC&Rs, and which gives each subdivision owner the right to enforce the CC&Rs. Related words: subdivision, CC&Rs, HOA, CID. Cripple wall. Short walls which enclose the crawl space. There are 3 basic residential structural systems used in the United States: full basement, slab on grade, and using a crawl space. The crawl space is typically a 3 to 4 foot space between the lower story floor and a home and the ground. The flooring joists are attached at their ends to the top of short walls called cripple walls and supported across their length on pylons. Pylons are concrete bases about a foot by a foot that come up about 8 to 12 inches in a trapezoidal shape. Often 4x4s will be placed between the pylons and bottom of the floor joists. Cripple walls are the height of the crawl space and sit on top of footings, which are concrete grade beams that extend around the footprint or perimeter of the home. On top of the cripple walls attach the ends of the floor joists. A cripple wall is just like a regular home wall, using 2x4s, 16 inches on center. Often cripple walls are paneled (sometimes the front of the wall only, and sometimes both sides of the wall) with plywood to make a rigid box called a shear wall. Cripple walls attach to the footings with anchor bolts. In general, cripple walls are the short walls which enclose the crawl space. Related words: crawl space, pylons, shear, shear wall, anchor bolts. Junior loan. Loan of secondary priority in foreclosure. Loans on real property are collateralized on the property itself. That is, the property is security that the loan will be repaid. Parentheses, it is called hypothecation when the borrower gets to use the collateral instead of it being held by the lender, end parentheses. But what happens if there are several loans on a property? Which loan gets repaid first in the event of default? Loans on a property line up according to which loan was taken first, parentheses, or recorded first, end parentheses. The lineup is called priority, and loans are literally labeled first priority, second, third, fourth, etc. A junior loan is another name for a loan not of first priority, but of second or more priority. A junior loan is not specifically second or third, etc., but definitely not first priority. So, junior loan is a loan of secondary priority in foreclosure. Deciduous. Losing leaves once a year in the fall, like an oak tree. Deciduous means losing leaves once a year in the fall. Deciduous is most often applied to trees, although it can apply to other plants too. In most cases, deciduous trees are the producers of, quote, hardwoods, end quote. A hardwood floor is typically from a deciduous tree like an oak or maple. Trees that do not lose their leaves are trees like the pine tree. Think of the typical Christmas tree as one which still has its green needles in December. Trees which do not lose their leaves each year are typically the softwoods. Pine is the best example. A popular flooring these days is bamboo. Bamboo is not even a wood. It is classified as a grass. Deciduous means a plant or tree which loses its leaves once a year in the fall.